We resume our sitting. I think I had called on the move of the motion. You had finished. The Minister of Financial Services had completed. And the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was hoping to avoid having to debate this motion, but I have been driven to my feet by the Leader of the Opposition's very interesting debate. But seriously, Mr. Speaker, before I actually go into some of the concerns I have, the motion in its current form could not properly be accepted by this House. For it, the resolution seeks something that the House cannot possibly agree to. The motion is technically defective. It provides in the resolved section, be it therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government consider immediately using the powers allowed by the Immigration Law 2015 revision under Section 46A to make the posts of the Cayman Islands Chief Fire Officer and the Chief Immigration Officer posts that can only be occupied by Caymanians with no exceptions. If I pause there, Mr. Speaker, there is no power under the immigration law, under Section 46A or otherwise, for which permits the government, the elected government, to make the posts of civil servants posts that can only be occupied with Caymanians with no exceptions. In fact, the immigration law specifically provides that that particular section does not apply to the civil service. So the motion is technically defective. It seeks a resolution which this House cannot possibly agree to. And if were we to agree to it, it would have no effect. As the acting Deputy Governor has pointed out, the relevant legislation that deals with civil service matters is the Public Service Management Law. And even in that instance, Mr. Speaker, the elected government nor the legislature can declare civil service posts to be Caymanian only or otherwise. That power is reserved under Section 55 of the Constitution as a special responsibility of the governor. So the motion seeks something that we can't possibly do, the House can't possibly agree to. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition has said, the motion does provide a platform to talk about broader concerns, broader concerns with respect to what is happening or not happening in relation to employment of Caymanians in the civil service, possibly more broadly the public service, and specifically with respect to promotion and training opportunities. Mr. Speaker, I think in many respects I can agree with the Acting Deputy Governor that the civil service has made great strides with respect to training and promotion and employment of Caymanians. But as she has acknowledged, and I have had this discussion with her a number of times, and with the Deputy Governor, as the old people say, over and often, the practices with respect to succession planning are nowhere near as good as they need to be. In some respects, we are going backwards within the civil service. There was a time when not only the Chief Fire Officer was Caymanian, but so was the Director of Prisons, so was the Commissioner of Police. All posts of those posts now are held by non-Caymanians. And so we have to acknowledge that, certainly with respect to those particular posts, succession planning has failed. And I believe the acting Deputy Governor has acknowledged that there are problems with that. The fundamental disagreement which I continue to have with the Deputy Governor about the present succession planning regime is this. As I understand it, the succession planning, their idea of succession planning is that you identify a suitable person or persons who could or who appear to be capable with the right training and experience to assume the particular post in question when the current holder demits that at retirement age or expiration of the contract or whatever the case may be. And you put them in train, and they go through the paces, they shadow, they do training courses, they do whatever it is they have to do. But then when that fateful day comes, that the office is vacant, they then have to apply for the job in the same way that any other applicant does. And I've talked to a number of HR professionals about this. That seems to be a hybrid of two concepts. One is the open recruitment, on the one hand, where you advertise the post, people apply, and the best candidate wins. With succession planning, with true succession planning, which identifies someone for the post, and assuming you go through your paces successfully, you achieve the goals which are set for you, the position is yours at the appointed time. What the civil service tries to do, I think, unsuccessfully, is to create a hybrid of the two, which is highly demotivating to many civil servants who say, why should I go through these paces only to have to compete with the whole world for this particular position? So it's neither chalk nor cheese, and I believe you need to be one or the other. Now, they disagree with me, and it is not my constitutional responsibility, but it is my responsibility, constitutional or otherwise, to keep pointing out things that I believe are militating against us getting in place Caymanians who are able and willing to do the job in these particular posts. Now, what I worry about in some of the contribution from the member from Georgetown Central is that we have to guard against dumbing down the requirements for key positions just to ensure that a Caymanian gets the job. That is not the way to go. What we have to aim to do...
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the Premier just said that I am dumbing down the qualifications. At no point in my contribution did I say any such thing or allude to dumbing down of the qualifications. Matter of fact, to the contrary, I said the opposite.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry if the member, but that's not a point of order, but but I'm not suggesting he used those particular words, but what he represented over and over again would have that effect of saying that you have to get a Caymanian for the job, regardless of whether that Caymanian is able to do the job or not. Because you're going to require it, there's got to be a Caymanian in that post, and whether they meet the requirements, the technical requirements, or have the qualifications, a Caymanian has to go in that post. I'm saying that we have to guard against that consequence, which is what his motion calls for. That it doesn't say that it should be a qualified Caymanian. And let me read it. And whereas many Caymanians believe these posts should be filled by Caymanians. That's it. So the qualification is to be a Caymanian. All I am saying is that we have to guard against saying that that is the only criteria, the only criterion, the only qualification that is necessary. What we have to do is put in place measures to ensure that whatever the requirements of the job are, Caymanians have the opportunity of acquiring those qualifications, that experience, because what has made Cayman successful is that we are good at what we do. And we can't put people's, let's use this example, we can't put people's lives and property at risk simply because regardless of whether the person has the relevant qualifications and experience, a Caymanian has to be the chief fire officer. What we have to do is put in place the proper systems that ensure that Caymanians do have those qualifications, the relevant experience, so they are able to do the job. That's all I'm trying to say. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I say, for those reasons, in addition to what has already been put forward by those who have spoken on this side before me, but in particular, the acting deputy governor, the government obviously cannot accept the motion in its present form, nor, Mr. Speaker, do we believe that the best interest of these islands and its people would be served by insisting at this stage that those positions, or particularly the chief fire officer, because we already have an acting chief immigration officer, must be filled by a Caymanian. Before I sit down, just let me underline what the acting deputy governor has said about the chief immigration officer position. That position has been, how shall I say, in a quandary for a number of years while the current holder the holder of the post was on required leave. The position is filled now by an acting officer, acting chief immigration officer, whose substantive post is one of the deputy chief immigration officers. All of that is in transition as we move towards a human resources department, which will take over many of the functions, administrative functions currently performed by the immigration department. And there will be some role changes, without question. Other aspects of what immigration does now, particularly the border control bits, will move to the new Cayman Border Force Agency. So all of these things are, as I say, at the moment in flux. But there is no reason to believe that Caymanians will not head up these new entities. In fact, that is the determination, that that we have, and I know is shared by the Deputy Governor and the Acting Deputy Governor, and we're all working towards that particular goal. I'll just finish by saying, Mr. Speaker, I doubt there was anybody more disappointed than I was, because I was the minister at the time, when sadly we were driven to the conclusion that we had to bring in a foreign chief fire officer. That was the first time in the history of the Cayman Islands Fire Service that had occurred. So no one is any more keen than I am that we get back to a position where a Caymanian can hold that position. But I also know, because I was so upset about it, that I insisted on seeing the scores of those who had done the tests in the two recruitment exercises, the two previous recruitment exercises. And faced with the scores that I saw, there was no way I could even begin to make the case that there was a choice other than the one which was eventually decided upon, and that is that we had to go with one of the foreign applicants. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand, we share the concerns, and I do believe that what the member from Georgetown Central, that he is motivated by the right things in trying to address this issue. But I do hope that based on the explanations that we've been able to provide, that he will understand that aside from the technical issues with his motion, that now is simply not the time to take this particular step. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I shall not keep the House very long. I was hoping that I didn't have to get up. I was hoping the Premier would have, for once and for at least for now, clarify, after all this time, clarify the reason why the Deputy Governor, there is a particular designation for that position for it to be Caymanian. Because that has been thrown around here for a very, very, very long time and used as some means of crutching up some other argument. The Deputy Governor position in the Constitution requires it to be a Caymanian.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I think I'll start with that one. When we were negotiating, preparing to negotiate the Constitution, we had a governor in this country that wasn't good for nothing. You need stronger ways of expressing it, because I can find those. Mr. Speaker, we found out that he was proposing to England through Ian Henry, who was the primary negotiator on behalf of government, and Susan Dixon, who was a secondary. We understood that he was going to propose to them to include in our Constitution that England send a deputy governor with a governor as well. And the Premier and all of us decided one of the fights that we were going to take up in those negotiations was to ensure that position be filled by local knowledge. And that was the fight we had to ensure that was taken up by a Caymanian, and we eventually settled for it to be a senior civil servant or former civil servant. Mr. Speaker, I make no excuses for having fought for that. We also fought to have England provide us with 3 names for governors. Governors coming, and we would be involved in the choosing of the governors.
Honorable Member, that's all true, but that has nothing to do with immigration and fire. So I'm asking you to get back to the bill.
I figure it has to do with immigration. They coming in, border control, and we're going to burn our country down.
You can't stretch it that far.
Well, we got to be careful how we spread the fire if we're stretching it. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, a little moment of levity is good for us. Mr. Speaker, all of us have Mr. Speaker, all of us in these honorable chambers and outside, and all those before us, I believe have always fought for Caymanians to have top position, leadership positions in their own country, in this country. Mr. Speaker, I can't fight unless those people are qualified. The fight must include being properly qualified. To that end, like the leader of the opposition said, I have fought to remove and to restructure this thing called succession planning within government. I don't think, like the Premier, that it is what we need to ensure that Caymanians get to the top positions. Certainly, I will agree with the Premier and the acting Deputy Governor that we have made great strides, but there is much to be done. My call,
Honorable Member, be careful of repetition of other members' arguments, standing orders.
Mr. Speaker, I've never understood that to be of other people's. It's of me. It's of me.
Oh, it's of you repeating what they say.
No, of me repeating what I say.
No.
That's what it's about. I can't repeat what I say.
No, you can't. It's of other members' argument.
Mr. Speaker.
So I'll give you some latitude, but it is 7:30 in the night.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know how one can debate 19, 18, 20 people in here to debate, and I would like to know how in this world no one will traverse some of the grounds that the others did.
Most of the time they don't.
They do, yeah?
They don't. And if they do, they don't do it as often as some other members, and therefore they have a little bit of latitude as I'm giving you right now.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I understand that you are aware of how it works. I'm very aware of that. I have been here for 17 years out of your 32 too. Mr. Speaker, Caymanians, my call to Caymanians in the workplace, and particularly so in the civil service, is to start improving themselves on their own. The one problem, challenge that I see we have in this country is, and it's not only in the civil service, in the private sector too. We get into the job, there are 5 people ahead of us, and we relax. We say, well, we'll never get that job. And we don't try then to improve ourselves. There are many instances that I can relate to, or I can explain, where that happened with me in my previous profession in CUC. Peter was top. Bruce Rick was the general manager. Richard Hugh, myself, was down below vice president. But we were being trained to take over the top position. Richard Hugh was one of my best friends. But we were competing for the top spot.
Honorable member, I'm glad to hear that, but the bill is different.
Mr. Speaker, it relates to succession planning in the fire service.
Please.
And I'm trying to use an example so people will understand. Is that too hard to understand?
1,000 times we've heard it, so we understand it.
Really, Mr. Speaker, without being so disrespectful to
you're
the
under a
chair.
good subject, debate the motion that is dealing with immigration and the fire service, and stick to that. That's all I'm saying.
But, Mr. Speaker, without trying to challenge the chair, I would like to know how Caymanians get in the top position in the civil service if they don't progress there. And how do we explain that unless we use examples? Whether that is in the private sector or in the civil service. And I was putting a challenge out to the members, the Caymanians in the civil service, and I was using a personal example. And something seems to be wrong with that. It really makes me wonder if I'm out in space. And that may be the case, but Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to explain, sir, which seems to not gain traction with your good self, or maybe with other members too, is that like the private sector, if civil servants sit around and merely do what they are paid to do and don't try to improve themselves, they will never reach the top. Every time the opportunity arises, it will pass them by. Because the same way people see that you come to work late, they also see that you came early. And they also see that you took the initiative to engage in some kind of studies on your own time. I cannot say that that's entirely what's wrong with the fire service now, nor the immigration. What I do know is that this fire service personnel are extremely capable of outing fires, and they understand that. Have they been trained to understand and conduct administration? And I believe that's where their shortcomings are. Now, that responsibility also lies, the employer has certain responsibilities in preparing one to do those things. The reason why I have fought all my political career for the succession plan to be a much more robust plan within government. The private sector that I came from, I witnessed, I lived succession planning, wherein 2, 3 people are chosen to be developed, which is jointly done between the employer and the employee, because the employee has to contribute to it as well, such as going to classes at nights, or when you have to go overseas. We do it. The employer pays for the tuition, and you must contribute your time. And at some stage, that employer has 2, 3 people that knows their business, that they can promote and they can create new positions in the efficiency of their business. I don't see the civil service doing that well enough. Maybe it's being done behind the scenes, but if it was, we certainly wouldn't have the fire service in the situation that it is in, wherein we can't find one person, one Caymanian, after some of them there for 20-odd years, to not be able to take over the civil service, the fire service. Now, the question that I have is, which of the current fire service personnel, since this argument is now hot and heavy and at the forefront, and the requirement for the chief fire officer, the qualifications now includes a bachelor's degree in fire science. Which one is currently in school studying for a bachelor's in fire science? I haven't heard anything about that. If no one is capable of entering a college to do that, which one then is being trained to get qualified for college entry? Because we are here for naught, to put a Caymanian there and they're not qualified. We're here for naught, like the Premier said. The motion says Caymanian. We should not promote our own Caymanians for them to fail. Let us prepare them in order that we know they will be there for a long time. and let us prepare the next generation of employees to take over in time. You can't have succession planning and then those you are training have to compete with everybody else who has more experience than them. Our problem is we are competing with all others when we should be competing amongst ourselves. And then we reach this point, and I believe the member from Georgetown has all good intentions, from Georgetown Central, has all good intentions. Maybe a little premature. Maybe the motion is worded wrong, in that he should have been asking government to ensure Caymanians are trained within a specified time to take these positions over. If it was me, but of course that's because of being here for a long time. That's the position I would put on the government. And the government would be hard-pressed not to accept it if it is a reasonable time frame. I know we need to, but based on the statistics that the deputy governor, acting deputy governor has said, both of those departments seems to be almost full Caymanian. 90-odd%, 98 something, 195 or something like 98.5 or something like that. But Mr. Speaker, what really got me with the deputy acting deputy governor's contribution was that it was this inference, or maybe not inference, stated position, maybe, somewhere in between there, that we're not allowed to inquire into anything to do with the civil service. That was made very clear. Well, the Constitution says that even Finance Committee can call anyone to inquire into anything to do with the civil service. But like we all know, it is us who the electors come to. And if we are not getting any responses from those who would otherwise clarify the situation, our only refuge, recourse, is right here. Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage civil servants to study. Set the goal for the top, and don't worry if it takes a little while and there are people in front of you. At some stage, it will be yours, or you will move on to something better. And that's how it works. There comes a point in a man's life or a woman's life, human's life, where you start getting diminishing returns on the job and you go look at another one. But in the meantime, develop yourself. All of us had to go through that. And then you can look, the civil servant can then look back at their time spent and say to all and sundry, you see my glory, you don't know my story. That's how it works. Mr. Speaker, I am hopeful that the fire chief that is there within time will be gone, but under the condition which he was brought in, to get somebody up to scratch to take over the fire service. And I hope that happens. But every now and again, the civil service becomes a little lackadaisical because somebody's in the position and nobody follows up on it, or the training is not forthcoming. I hope that's not the case in this one. I should say I was very glad to see Ms. Ichanike confirmed recently. That one was very quick, because at one stage the civil service was Hollywood, nothing but actors, a lot of acting. Mr. Speaker, I understand the members' feelings. I understand what he's trying to do. I don't know if how he's doing it is the right way to do it. The government has now said that they're not going to accept it because of how it is. But it's an honorable attempt. And I say to the member from Georgetown Central, this is how this House operates. I have lost more battles in here than I care to remember. Few I have won, especially when the UDP government was in power. Those are facts. Those are facts. The current premier and I have lost many battles, but it didn't stop us from the fight. The member from Savannah and I have lost many battles here.
Honorable
but
member,
we consider them honorable.
Please get back to the motion. That is not anywhere in the motion. So please get back to the motion.
Mr. Speaker, really, I am trying to congratulate the young man.
Honorable member,
on bringing it.
Please, if you would have any more to say, sit down, take your seat.
You can't tell me take my seat when I am debating.
I can't. Don't make me go to the standing orders. On the grounds that you are not debating this motion.
Mr. Speaker, did this young man not bring this motion?
He brought the motion. You've said that. You've said that several times. And others have said it, and now you're repeating it again.
But everybody knows that he brought it. I'm trying to encourage him.
If everybody knows he brought it, then everybody knows that.
Mr. Speaker, really, I just do not know what I have done.
Honorable member, please take your seat. Does any other member wish to speak?
I said you need to stop this. Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Do you have more to speak? Do you have more to say?
If I may.
Please debate the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I would like,
Well, like, you know, that's what he said just now, elbow. No, elbow. No, I'm talking about relevance.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask why I'm being stopped from debating?
Honorable member, standing orders of this House says you cannot be repetitious, that you should be relevant to the matter at hand. That's what the standing order says. 41 specifically says, the presiding officer, after having called the attention of the House or of a committee to the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition, either of his own arguments or of the arguments used by other members, may direct the member to discontinue his speech and to resume his seat. And nobody can say that I haven't been calling attention to the member of repetition. Too much of that goes on in this House, and we talk about time, we're not starting on time, and we're not starting on time. The fact is, honorable members, that much time is wasted by repetition and the games that people play on benches. It is nearly 8 o'clock. And if I should say so, when you all should have debated your motions, you should have been debating your motions, you were debating questions. And I gave plenty of latitude in it. But I should say here that I am, at this point, disappointed that we are just at this point when we got 9 or 8 motions to deal with. Now, honorable member, section standing order 41 tells me what I can do. I have brought to your attention, besides the standing orders for relevance, I am sticking to standing order 41 at this point.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, on a total different thing. Send your ruling, which I'll have to bow to. Will the chair accept point of order on reputation from all and sundry?
I've said earlier, when the member drew that matter to my attention, that members repeat, but other members repeat more. I've given latitude across the board, but there has to be a point where it is curtailed. And so standing order 41 stands. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the mover, member for Central Georgetown, wish to exercise his right of reply?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems as if this motion has now turned into the legality of whether or not the government members of this House have the right, by way of Constitution or by way of law, to insist that the post of which we're talking about can be mandated by their order, Mr. Speaker. And I was prepared for that argument, hence the reason I alluded to that when I started, Mr. Speaker. And I intend to address that. But before I address that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honorable member from East End for his kind words. I think a number of kind words came from a number of members of the House, including the Premier, in respect of my intentions, and I appreciate that being a new member of this House. But it is of my view that though, Mr. Speaker, I think it's best that I deal with the contributions by the Premier first, not because I'm in any way,
repeat anything he says.
not because in any way particularly dealing with him in respect to him being a Premier, but I thought he did probably a skill set that I haven't learned yet, but I intend to identify it. In this argument, Mr. Speaker, the members of this House are going to try to find ways to say, well, listen, this is not my responsibility. And ultimately, I think that's what they have said. Because the public is listening to this debate because it's a hot topic in respect to national pride and Caymanians being in post of authority and decision making. But a very tactical move by the Premier earlier was to read my motion, but stop specifically at no exceptions. And now, Mr. Speaker, for those who are listening and probably watching by TV, I want to read my motion very clearly so everybody can understand. At least the resolved section, Mr. Speaker. It says, be it therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government consider immediately using the powers allowed by the Immigration Law 2015 revision under Section 46A, which we'll argue in a second in respect to whether they're allowed to do so or not, to make the post of Cayman Islands Fire Chief Officer and Chief Immigration Officer posts that can only be occupied by Caymanians with no exceptions. But the last sentence, Mr. Speaker, which is a very important one, and he specifically avoided it for a reason, says, and to carry out any other legislative changes to make to give necessity that may be necessary to give effect to this policy objective. And I specifically put that in there for a reason, because I expected that they would say that Section 46A, they don't have authority to do so. Because a very good man, Mr. Oric Connor, highlighted to me the discrepancy within the immigration law when it came to civil servants. So I added that next to the line in there. So basically that line says, well, if that part of the law don't cover it and don't give you the authority, then do whatever you need to do legislative-wise to make the changes to do so. But they may argue that they can't do that either, Mr. Speaker. So I turn their attention now, Mr. Speaker, to the Constitution, because they say they don't have any authority, and the Honorable Minister and the Premier and the Deputy Governor, Acting Deputy Governor, and I believe the Honorable Opposition Leader have alluded to what is considered, and in my view, I may argue with it a little bit here, is that we don't have the authority to hire or fire. And I agree, we can't hire them. But I think that this Honorable House, that the people have elected the members of, have the authority to tell them at least what kind of person to hire. Now, which one? But we should have the authority to say, listen, you're going to hire somebody, make sure it's Caymanian. And I'm going to refer now, Mr. Speaker, to the Constitution, which is the highest order of this country. So if the section that I quoted, because I'm a newbie, is not good enough, Mr. Speaker, by no means could the government not come and say, Mr. Bryan and this Honorable House, we see the intent, we think it's a good one, we'll accept with amendments. They do so when it's necessary for the government to do so, when they want to accomplish a goal of their own. So we know that it's possible. Mr. Speaker, I don't think the procedures say that I would have to present the Constitution, because I think everybody in this House has one. Would that be correct? Okay, so I understand that I can read from the Constitution. In Section 16, it says, subject to sections 3, 4, 5, and 6, government shall not treat any person in a discriminatory manner in respect of their rights under this part of the Constitution. But in subsection 4, that was subsection 1, in subsection 4 it says, subsection 1 shall not apply to any law so far as that the law makes provisions for, and I'm specifically talking about B of this section, with respect to the entry into or exclusion from or the employment engaging in any business or profession, movement or residence within the Cayman Islands of persons whom are not Caymanian. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not a lawyer, but I've had the opportunity to speak to some very experienced lawyers who say their interpretation of that is that we as legislators, whose responsibility is to monitor the governance of our legislation, and this is the highest one in the land, says that that means that we can discriminate in respect to employment in this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, if the legislators of this House, if the 19 members of this House, who the Cayman Islands people have chosen, decide to say, listen, we want Caymanians in these particular positions, it can happen. And even, Mr. Speaker, if their interpretation of this Constitution is not what I just interpreted and what other members, other legislators, other attorneys, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, interpret this law to mean, the government can also make recommendations to change the Constitution to make sure that Caymanians are in these posts. So there's no excuses, Mr. Speaker. None. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think I've made that point rather clear. I agree with every member in this House in respect to saying safety is an issue. I recognize that I'm a former fire officer myself. I understand the importance of making sure a qualified person is there. And I'm going to highlight again, the fact that we, when it's necessary to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish, make amendments to motions, we make amendments to bills, and we compromise. So, Mr. Speaker, if it was the viewpoint that we wanted to accomplish this, the amendments could be made. And Mr. Speaker, I would say as the mover of this motion, I would have no problem giving or making amendments to my motion to suggest a delay in the implementation of the intent of this motion so that the motion can carry. I understand they're having difficulties at the fire department. I speak to fire officers all the time. I reported on it before I became a politician, Mr. Speaker. I spoke to the chief officer about the difficulties they're facing. I know that there is a plan by the minister that by a certain timeline, they have a Caymanian there. So why not we pass it, do whatever it takes to make sure that there's a Caymanian post with a qualified individual? Beg your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence, sir. This motion gets more interesting by the second. Mr. Speaker, I think I was at the point where I was suggesting that we can make amendments to this motion to accomplish the goal upon which the foundation of it is. And I think that everybody in here has already accepted what the foundation of this motion is trying to accomplish. And nobody has disagreed with that, thankfully, Mr. Speaker. Now, I was suggesting before that safety is an issue, and I agree it's one that we have to pay attention to, because the position of the fire chief is a very, very important one, and one that can put many people's lives at risk. So we have to be very cautious with it. But when we fix the problem, which I know the capable minister, a minister who say when she gonna do something, she gonna do it. I'll give her credit for that. That when she finished doing what she has to do, Mr. Speaker, that when people are put in place and the succession plan is there and she continued to argue for the funding for the training, that if whatever date that she feels that is necessary, then the motion could be implemented then. There's a delay, it can happen. If we choose to do so, it can happen, there's no excuses. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on now to another interesting point that I noticed in the deliberations by everybody, is that everybody's viewpoint, Mr. Speaker, is that the Immigration Department is good. The Immigration Department is working quite fine. Things are good. Caymanians are in the ranks. We don't have, according to the acting deputy governor, when there's not a problem, why try to fix, when there's, let me rephrase, Mr. Speaker, give me a second. Oh, if there's no problem, why are we trying to fix it? I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I find a problem with the fact that events have happened in our country when we thought everything was going to be okay. That department is Caymanized. We don't worry, there's not going to be no foreigner inside there. And then eventually you hear somebody in the civil service thinks, based on qualifications, based on experience, and based on a number of other things, well, we can't find a good enough Caymanian for it. How can I be certain? How can the Cayman people be certain that when all the good members of this house are gone, that they're not going to allow somebody else to be in charge of the Immigration Department? Don't know how we can ensure that. It's put it by way of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also the fact that everybody have agreed that the Immigration Department is not broken, they are the perfect candidate for a motion like this. Because what they're saying is, they have members in line, they have a Caymanian who's acting, and things are all jolly in the Immigration Department. But I know this Honorable House knows that there are members who are worried that one day the Immigration Department may be headed up by a foreigner too. And the only way we can be certain that that does not happen is by making sure that we put it as that position to be Caymanian only. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that I clarify something that the Premier said. And I agree that I am new and I'm going to learn the tricks and trades in one matter of time. I learned one tonight. Which is the fact that I did not put in qualified Caymanian, as opposed to suggesting that I'm saying to put somebody who's not qualified. The top priority has to be protecting our people in important roles. Mr. Speaker, another element that I've heard from most persons is the solid track record of hiring Caymanians by the DG, the acting deputy governor. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with that statement at all. Mr. Speaker, we've had qualified Caymanians in a number of positions in this country to do head posts, and for whatever reason, They never seem to make it to the top. Matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, some of the honorable members here have highlighted the strategy of changing the goalposts every time a Caymanian is about ready to take the post. Today, the qualification is one thing, and a Caymanian says, you know something, it won't matter time before I get the job. When the time comes, then they say, oh, you need a bachelor's degree. Mr. Speaker, how can somebody train to be something and prepare themselves to be something, even if they wanted to? If the qualifications to do that job today is one thing, and when the post comes available to do the job, and when you get there and you find out, well, they got some new qualifications, how can you plan for that, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if everybody in this House agrees with my principle from the legality of whether this can be done. I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that we should tell the people of this country that we cannot do that. Whether it means that we have to write to England and say we want a constitutional change to protect certain posts in this country, then we have to do that. If that is the people's will. So I don't think that's a good enough excuse. Mr. Speaker, in respect to the deputy governor's, acting deputy governor's contribution, one of the things that came up to me that I don't think she recognized is that there's a serious problem with trust. I appreciate the deputy governor, the acting deputy governor. I appreciate the now governor or acting governor and everything he's been doing so far. I'm not sure if all the decisions that are made are necessarily him directly who are making them. I know that he makes policy decisions that's supposed to be handed down, and he trusts his chief officers to do the right thing and try to make sure and implement succession planning. But I don't think always his idea, his theory, actually follows through, Mr. Speaker. Because since he took the post, Mr. Speaker, he's been saying that. And if I am correct, he's been there now 6 years. I know he was there for the last administration, 1 year now, and probably about a year before that. So 5 years, Mr. Speaker. And to get a handle on succession planning, how long does it take to find a police chief? How long does it take for succession planning for the prison chief? And there's a number of other posts across the civil service who make decisions that are vital to the Caymanian people, that I will not go into that list. I'd love to, I should have done one, Mr. Speaker, but there's a number of other posts that I know the Caymanian people who are listening right now can think to themselves, you know, that'd be a good post, an important post the Caymanian should fill. That could have been dealt with. And to say that we had to sit here and trust the civil service, whose obligations, I dare say, by Constitution, is to the Queen. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. The people elected us. We are servants to the Caymanian people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because I am a newbie, sir, if I am going too far or my demeanor delivery is in any way inappropriate, please let me know, okay? But this is how I speak. This is my delivery.
All you did was wake him up.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot say, and I think a lot of people feel the same way I feel, that we do not have enough confidence in the structure of the system, not necessarily the trust in the now acting governor, because he's an amazing individual and I know his heart is in the right place. But there's a number of systems that are in place that he may not necessarily always have his eyes on, and little things can happen where a Caymanian can be undermined. I know that if it was mandated by legislation, there's no way they could undermine it. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems to be rather hypocritical, in my view, to tell or to have a law, and speaking of the law that is in the motion, which is 46A, and for the purposes of the listening audience, I think it's important that I read what that says, because I want to highlight some hypocrisy that we create in this honorable House so often. It says, 46A reads as, the Cabinet may, by order, designate certain professions, trades, businesses, occupations, vacations, and types of employment as restricted areas of employment for the purposes of Section 41(2), but an order made under this subsection has no effect unless it's subsequently ratified by the Legislative Assembly. And it's important that we highlight what 41(2) says in order to understand it. And 41(2) says, subject to Section 2, no person shall carry out gainful occupation in the Cayman Islands unless he is an A, Caymanian, then it goes into a list of other things. But the important point in this one is Caymanian. Now, the Premier speaks about the part where it doesn't allow them, the government, I dare say, the Cabinet, to take this action because of Section 40 of the same immigration law, Part V. It says, this part does not apply to a person employed by the government of the islands in respect to his employment. So we created a law when was that? We created a law in March of 2013 that says we can dictate to the private sector that certain jobs can be only for Caymanians, certain posts can only be for Caymanians, but we can't do it in the civil service? You tell me what kind of hypocrisy that is. And we expect to govern the private sector and treat Caymanians right, but we can't do it to the civil service? Mr. Speaker, and they wonder why we don't trust them. They wonder why I have to come here and try to bring a motion to mandate it that it be law. Because of hypocrisy like that. And I dare say, Mr. Speaker, based on the contributions in the Hansards in 2013, when this was passed, there was no indication to say, hey, by the way, this is not got nothing to do with civil service, it's only private sector. Nobody alluded to that, because you know why? Because the public, the Caymanian people would go, well, what the point of the law? They hide the little small nuances that they want to talk about. Mr. Speaker, I think that, matter of fact, I understand, Mr. Speaker, that there's some firemen right now who are training for fire science and can't get the support from the same fire chief. And this is the problem that we have. We have foreigners in these positions. We have Caymanians who are trying to upskill themselves and come up the ranks. But when you have a foreigner there who wants to stay there, Mr. Speaker, what do you think the chances are of that person making sure they have the opportunity to come up the ranks? Or say, let me allocate some of this budget so you can get that extra certificate to come and take my own job. What do you think the reality of that's going to be, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I want to bring to your attention, and I think it's relevant to this current discussion, something that is in the customs law. And the relevance of it is about the fact of whether we have the right to dictate whether a person should have a certain post. And it goes into this discussion of whether we can hire and fire. Mr. Speaker, in the Customs Law 2017 revision, Section 4 says, the chief officer, in accordance with the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision, but after consultation with the official member being the member of cabinet, Mr. Speaker, responsible for the portfolio of which the Customs Department may be a part, shall appoint a suitable person who shall be called the Collector of Customs to be the officer in control of the customs. For me, Mr. Speaker, that is giving us control. So you cannot say that we do not have say in some of our legislation to be involved in the hiring practices, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our Constitution...
Clarity. What section of the law was that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Customs Law 2017 revision, Section 4, Part 1.
Section
4, subsection, no, Part 4, because only one section.
Subsection 4.
Yes, sir.
Part 4?
No, Section 4, just straight Section 4, Mr. Speaker.
And you, what was it you read? Sorry. I need to hear that again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 4 says, appointment of a collector, a 2017 revision. So basically the appointment of the head of the Customs Department, Mr. Speaker. And it reads as such: the chief officer, in accordance with the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision, but after consultation with the official member responsible for the portfolio of which the Customs Department may be a part, shall appoint a suitable person who shall be called the Collector of Customs to be the officer in control of customs. The official member is the Minister of Finance.
No. No. The official member is not the Minister of Finance. The official member is a civil servant. And we can't, I think I'm right in this, that the official member is a civil servant. And they have the responsibility. The Minister of Finance is the elected member. They do not, and that's what I think everybody on this side has been saying. If you are saying otherwise, you better read that again.
Mr. Speaker, I'd say that because that part is a mere small element of my discussion, that I'm happy to retract it. It was only to support my already strong enough argument, in my view, in respect to what I was saying.
No, you can't, because that is wrong, and the House has to be given correct information.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before, thank you so much. I don't mind retracting that. If the word official member means a civil servant and not the minister, then I do apologize to this honorable House. But in respect to my other arguments, in respect to the Constitution, unless the Attorney General or the leader of the government, the Honorable Premier, wants to dispute the challenge of what I'm saying about the Constitution, I am happy to discuss that. But I know that they cannot dispute the fact that they have the opportunity as elected members of this House they have the opportunity as elected members of this House to make suggestions to constitutional change if they feel fit. So it's important that we tell the truth to the people of this country that if we wanted these positions to be Caymanian only, that we have the ability to get that done. I don't think it's fair to the Caymanian people that we say, oh, we don't have the right to do it. That's not good enough for me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in respect to the fact that we want qualified individuals in these posts, Mr. Speaker, I would dare say there is a number of posts in this country right now that have officers or persons in it, and I dare say the Caymanian, but they're not qualified to be in the post. But they're still in the post, and that's not a bad thing, Mr. Speaker. What that says is that we're willing to give Caymanians the opportunity to prove themselves. That's a good thing. But we use the fact of qualifications to a specific degree whenever it's necessary that we don't want Cayman there. So why is it that we can say, well, you know what, we stated the qualifications for this position is this, but you don't quite make it, but we're going to still give you a chance. But in other circumstances, Mr. Speaker, you don't give other Caymanians other chances. Hypocrisy again, Mr. Speaker, and this is why there's trust issues in respect to the hiring practices within the civil service, hence the reason for the motion in the first place. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Governor, the Acting Deputy Governor also spoke about this, and I'm not trying not to repeat, I just want to make sure that I said it, about the strong hiring practices in the history of hiring Caymanians. Nobody is saying that we expect that these departments are being filled by foreigners. What we're saying is the highest position in these departments should be secured by a Caymanian. And I also would like to echo, but not repeat, the position of the opposition leader when he said, what is wrong with bringing those persons who are really, really qualified to come in and assist the Caymanian? If we were saying, particularly in the fire department, we have some officers, but they're all not quite just made it yet. Couldn't we have, just from the perspective of symbolicness, symbolism, to say we have the Caymanian as the head, and maybe a more qualified person, but they're the deputy, because we're trying to protect what our images in our people's mindset on we are in charge of our own destiny, whether that's not the case or not, but at least you comfort the people to believe that they have something to stand for. Couldn't we not have put a Caymanian at the head and potentially a deputy or two who are more qualified, who can make sure they tick off the responsibilities that is necessary to run the department? That's a possibility. Matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I suggested a secondment idea and nobody even said anything about it. Not even as an option. That tells me, Mr. Speaker, there's no consideration to even the notion. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that most people who have given contribution respect my position and what I'm trying to do. But I do not think it's fair, Mr. Speaker, for us to sell to the people of this country that this is not our responsibility, or...
Honorable Member, you've made that point several times. Bear in mind, standing order of repetition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I apologize for my repetition. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister in charge of the Fire Department spoke about the fact that, you know, of course you'd want to have Caymanians in charge of department she's supervising or has constitutional responsibility to deal with. That if all things were equal, that it'd be ideal to have a Caymanian there. And I'm not sure if I made myself clear in respect to that premise when I first started, but the truth is, Mr. Speaker, all things are not equal based on globalization. And if I am correct, Mr. Speaker, she also said that everybody is in the world, a lot of other countries are dealing with globalization. I agree. Many countries are. But the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is those countries who are dealing with the negative effects on employment because of globalization are doing something about it, Mr. Speaker. What do you think Brexit is all about? Mr. Speaker, the whole concept of Brexit was the fact that the people of England felt in fear of their own livelihood by way of employment. You heard about it, Mr. Speaker, so many times in the media. If it wasn't a job issue, Brexit probably wouldn't have happened, Mr. Speaker. So other countries are dealing with the fact of globalization. So to highlight, and I know that she didn't do it in an malicious way in respect to conflict in my argument, but more to just to make me understand. But I say that I recognize globalization is affecting us from a employment perspective. But recognizing it is not enough. Doing something about it is what we need to do, Mr. Speaker. Hence the reason of the motion. Mr. Speaker, I want to just say that I'm in my closing up remarks that I appreciate the opportunity to present it, and I appreciate that everybody understands where I'm coming from. But I hope, and I am suggesting to the government, before just deciding to say no, maybe there could be some considerations to amendments. And matter of fact, it brings me to another point that the Premier hesitated on, Mr. Speaker. He said, I cannot take, at this particular time, accept the motion in its current form. And then he went on to say, because the laws doesn't allow it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't think he agrees with my position on what I said about the constitutional element, but I don't think he can disagree about the fact that we have the authority, particularly the government, to make suggestions to constitutional change to ultimately get the policy objective of this motion. I don't think he's going to disagree with that. But it seems to me that he was hesitant to say that he can't accept it in its current form. Is there a form? Is there a way that this can be accepted? And if so, why wasn't it suggested? Why wasn't it suggested? Ultimately, I think, one thing I did not hear, Mr. Speaker, is anybody disagree that we wanted Caymanians in these heads posts. Nobody disagreed with that. But did anybody make any suggestions on how can we concrete the Caymanians in there? Because nothing is guaranteed until it's legislation, and even then it's not guaranteed because it can be changed. We have to depend on the trust of the civil service head, who we constantly as legislators argue about all the time. But we're not willing to make it a surety for posts that are important to this country. And if I can say this, Mr. Speaker, I think that the post of Chief Immigration Officer is probably one of the most symbolically most important posts. Doesn't have the authority like the Premier or the Deputy Governor and all that, but from a symbolic perspective, particularly on the fact that Caymanians feel that they're being undermined in their own country just from the knowledge of protectionism of their own. It should be a post for Cayman only. Even if it's just in the spirit of patriotism to make people feel that there is a Cayman looking out for them. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that my motion is defective as has been suggested. I strategically put my motion exactly the way it is. There was actually suggestions to bring it a little different, and I decided not to. because I know, based on my feedback, that they wouldn't want to support it, and they'll come up with excuses as to not push to get this done. But Mr. Speaker, this motion wasn't about me or it passing right now. The people of this country is listening. They're going to call me, they're going to call you, they're going to call all the members of this House, and they're going to tell you how they felt about this debate. That's what this is all about, Mr. Speaker, about the people of this country.
Especially what was visited upon me.
So at the end of the day, we can say what we want to say and try to use any excuse we want to use, but I want you to remind the members of this House one thing.
Drink your water.
Thank you. I'm not getting dry.
What told you tell me drink your water?
I want to remind the members of this House, Mr. Speaker, and I want to ask your forgiveness for my delivery. I know that sometimes my assertiveness can easily be mistaken for aggressiveness. I'm just a passionate person. But I want to, in closing, in respect to my motion, make these suggestions. In every debate, in every argument, in every decision, every dispute, every parlay, every dialogue, every powwow, every argument, every war of words, negotiation, disagreement, discussions, no matter what way of communication you make to make a decision, there's always one thing, and it's the human element that gives us, and it's called the gut feeling.
Honorable member, are you ready to wind up, or you want to finish in the morning?
No, sir. You give me 2 more minutes, I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is that thing called the gut feeling. And I know that there's been many suggestions in here as to why we should not support this motion and given excuses why we should not support this motion. But I say that maybe it's time to discuss with your leader, the various leaders, as to say, can we make this work? Is putting the pressure on the civil service or making a suggestion for a constitutional change as a way of dealing with this matter? Can we do this? Because my gut feeling is telling me my people really would want this done. Trust your gut feeling. Because I know that particularly with the direction of the country, that this is something the people of this country would really like to see succeed. Mr. Speaker, I thank you so much for the opportunity to present this motion. I hope that I haven't missed anything. I'm going to probably regret it tomorrow morning of something that I forgot to say, but I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to thank the members who gave contribution, the Honorable Premier, the Honorable Minister that's in charge of the Fire Department, Honorable Opposition Leader, the member from East End, and the Acting Deputy Governor. I appreciate it. I hope that the members reconsider before making their decision on this vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, be it therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government consider immediately using the powers allowed by the Immigration Law 2015 revision under Section 46A to make the post of the Cayman Islands Chief Fire Officer and the Chief Immigration Officer posts that can only be occupied by Caymanians with no exceptions, and to carry out any other legislative changes that may be necessary to give effect to this policy objective. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Those against?
No. The ayes have it. What?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, the noes. Sorry, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I call for a division.
Clerk. The noes were so resounding that.
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
No.
Honorable Moses Kirkconnell. No. Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
No.
Honorable Dwayne Seymour. Still not working.
No.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
No.
Honorable Joseph Hugh.
No.
Honorable Tara Rivers. Honorable Barney Bush. Captain Eugene Ebanks.
No.
Mr. David White.
No.
Ms. Barbara Connolly.
No.
Mr. Austin Harris.
No.
Honorable Ezra Miller.
Abstain.
Mr. Alba Saku.
Aye.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Anthony Eden.
No, go with me. Aye.
Oh, right. Mr. Christopher Saunders.
Aye. Aye. Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Arden McLean.
Results of the division: 4 ayes, 11 noes, 1 abstention, 2 absentees. The motion has failed. Premier, will you please call adjournment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I regret to say that progress has been very limited today. We have gotten through 1 private member's motion of 9. And even with the government's willingness to carry on tomorrow beyond the government business, there is no chance of us completing the private members' motions that are on the agenda for this meeting. We will not be able to run the House late tomorrow. Some members have to leave. Others, including myself and a number of ministers, have to prepare to depart for New York and then on to Hong Kong the next day. And so we will propose to adjourn the House at the usual time tomorrow. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Question is that this Honourable House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow. That is the 16th of March. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Honourable House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow, 16th day of March, 2018.